So I was talking with a friend earlier today who's pretty well tied in with this sort of thing, and he said that he puts the current odds of a Hezbollah-Israel war at 50-50, which is crazy. So we'll talk about some recent developments on Israel's northern border. We've got rumors that the United States is circulating a draft UN Security Council resolution that, if it comes forward, would be the strongest public opposition that the U.S. has voiced against Israel since this war began. We'll take a look at some Houthi claims over the last couple days. They say that they shot down an American Reaper drone and sunk a British ship. The jury is technically still out on both of those. And then we look at a report from an American doctor that went to Gaza that I think highlights just the tragic nature of this and really any war. It's a lot to get into, so I'm glad you're here. I'm recording this at 9 a.m. Central on Tuesday, February 20th, 2024. Starting up north on the Lebanese-Israeli border, or further into Lebanon in this case, yesterday Israel says that they carried out a strike against two weapons depots belonging to Hezbollah in, I guess, still southern Lebanon. Most of the attacks between Hezbollah and the IDF are taking place right along the border. In this case, however, this facility that was struck was about 40 miles inside of Lebanese territory. So it's not the furthest that Israel has struck inside of Lebanon since this war began, I don't believe. I think there's been a couple a little further north. But still, it's notable the distance from the border that Israel went to carry out this strike. According to Lebanese state media, they say what was targeted was a warehouse where tires and electric generators were manufactured. And they say that 14 total people were wounded, not saying anything about killed. They say most of those wounded were Syrian and Palestinian workers. Now, these strikes, apparently, they look just based off the timing, came as a response to a series of drone strikes against Israel carried out by Hezbollah just a few hours prior that also resulted in no damage or injuries. Now, since that strike took place, the IDF strike against Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for 4 more attacks against Israeli targets in Israel so far today. Now, an interesting aspect when looking at the simmering conflict on the northern border, you could probably classify it as a war, just the volume of fire that's being exchanged between the two. One of the challenges here is both sides are kind of saying the same thing. So both Israel and Hezbollah are saying as soon as the other party stops escalating, stops provoking, and stops attacking us, we can get back to peace. The fact that both are kind of dug in, saying the exact same thing, is one of the indications that this is probably headed towards a wider conflict. Then looking at some statements here from Sarah Zahavi, the founder and president of the Alma Education and Research Center in Israel. She says, quote, "I do believe that Hezbollah is interested in a war and is doing everything it can to drive Israel into a war. Hezbollah has created a situation in the northern part of Israel that is unbearable for Israelis and unbearable for the state of Israel. They know that at a certain point, Israel will say enough is enough and will be forced to launch a military campaign." That's one argument here, is that Hezbollah is trying to draw Israel into a war. There have been quite a few senior Israeli leaders talking pretty hawkishly about what they will and can do to Hezbollah and to Lebanon as a whole. Another thing to keep in mind here is just the impact that the ongoing war is having to Israel as a whole. You know, I've said before, one of the arguments for some people in Israel to say we need to go further north into Lebanon and deal with Hezbollah right now is because the forces are mobilized. Israel has mobilized the reserves and have a lot more people in uniform. The infrastructure is set up right now to carry out a large-scale war. That's not usually the reason that you would want to go to war, but unfortunately that's sometimes in history how things play out. They have the forces, might as well do it now. Another argument for that is that the Israeli economy is taking a beating over the last few months. A new report came out on CNN earlier saying that Israeli GDP plunged 19.4% on an annualized basis in the period July to September. They say that was worse than expected and was driven by a 27% drop in private consumption. Significant. These are big, big numbers. They say that fixed investment by businesses tumbled 67.8%, driven by near halt in residential building, resulting from military call-ups and a reduction in Palestinian workers. They also say that exports declined 18.3%. Those are crazy numbers for an economy to fall off that amount. That is not something that can be sustained long term. What Israel has going for them is once their economy has not been decimated, in a sense, right? This isn't like what's happening in Ukraine right now, where so much of the infrastructure is being destroyed and a lot of the manpower is being killed. That's not the case in Israel. As soon as this war stops, a lot of these negative economic trends will quickly reverse because the workers will go back to work and the economy is right back headed to where it was when this all started. Now, for reference, we're talking here about, what was that, a 19.4% drop in Israeli GDP. When you look back, and this is a challenging comparison for what it's worth, but when you look back at Russia at the start of the war in Ukraine, their GDP fell something like 4 or 5% in the first quarter when the sanctions hit following their invasion of Ukraine. The economies are very different in size, scale, all sorts of different aspects. But again, to give you an idea, 19% drop in the GDP, that is significant. That is not something that Israel can afford to have play out for another 6, 12, 18 months. Then turning back here to the United States, there's rumors that the United States is circulating the text of a draft United Nations Security Council resolution that would call for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza and publicly oppose a ground offensive by Israel into Rafah. This is significant if it moves forward. It sounds like, just from what we're seeing here, this is people inside of the United States kind of testing the water, seeing what the reaction would be to this before actually moving it forward technically out into the public domain. Remember, at this point, it's still kind of behind closed doors, could still be denied. So I would say that if the response to these stories is overwhelmingly negative, then it'll probably just die on the vine and it won't even be addressed, right? It never actually happened. But if there's silence or there's support for this type of resolution, this very well might end up being pushed forward for a vote by the UN Security Council, which I believe would mark the most significant public pushback against Israel by the United States so far. Then we do have some text that might be included in this resolution. Take this with a big grain of salt because, again, we're talking about rumors of a draft that is being circulated behind closed doors. And now all of a sudden we've got direct quotes. So just be cautious with that. But what these quotes have are that the United States determines that under current circumstances, a major ground offensive into Rafah would result in further harm to civilians and their further displacement, including potentially into neighboring countries. They say such a move would have serious implications for regional peace and security, and therefore underscores that such a major ground offensive should not proceed under current circumstances. Now, this is notable because at the same time, all European Union countries, with the exception of Hungary, came out saying that a Rafah offensive would be catastrophic. They said, quote, "We ask the Israeli government not to take military action in Rafah that would worsen an already catastrophic humanitarian situation and prevent the urgently needed provision of basic services and humanitarian assistance." Now, the flip side here is this is the last area in Gaza where some of these senior and key Hamas leaders could be operating, and where many of the hostages at this point are likely to be held. So it's, on the one hand, it will likely, if Israel were to go in right now, it will likely result in a significant humanitarian crisis above and beyond what we've seen so far. But that is also probably where the last remnants or the remaining aspects of Hamas are holed up. So Israel's certainly in a tough spot there. Then real quick, a thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Venture Surplus. You've heard me talk about these guys on this channel before, and it's really cool to be able to work with a solid group like this. You know, an American veteran-owned business. And I think one of the guys was an Army artilleryman, so bonus points for that. Now, last week, I was in a CPR class where I have to go through every couple of years. And as a part of that, they pull out all these different medical supplies and say, you know, if you happen to have this on hand, it could be really helpful in the event of an emergency. And we do. I do. My family does. This stuff is in our vehicles, in the shed, in our house, and all of it is available on Venture Surplus. Never a bad idea to stock up that little medical kit. So pulling up their first aid and trauma supply page here, you know, things like a tourniquet or 2 or 3, a handful of gauze, space blanket. There's a lot of scenarios where it could be very, very beneficial to have this stuff on hand. And of course, you can never go wrong with a grenade paperweight. You know, who doesn't need one of those? And I hadn't seen these Whoopee hoodies before. Those look, I'm gonna have to get my hands on one of those. So be sure to check out the link in the description and use Preston10 for 10% off your next order at Venture Surplus. Then turning down to Yemen, we've got a video released by the Houthis here where they said yesterday that they successfully shot down an American MQ-9 Reaper drone that was operating over their territory. We don't really have confirmation from the United States at this point, not really denial either. According to the Pentagon, they say they are investigating the cause of a crash of an American surveillance drone off the coast of Yemen. And they say that an MQ-9 Reaper fell out of the sky. So, not denial. It's in this video, you can see a lot of drone parts. I am not an expert in being able to look at wreckage from an aircraft and say it is or is not a certain type of aircraft, but it does kind of line up. If the U.S. is at least saying that a drone fell out of the sky, yet to confirm that it was shot down, and the Houthis are pulling wreckage out of the sea from what they say is an MQ-9 Reaper, it looks like something happened there. And this wouldn't be the first. It was just a few months ago, the Houthis also shot down another drone, another U.S. drone in that area. Then there was also some news about the Ruby Mar, a British ship. I saw some reports that it had been sunk or was sinking. Those appear to not be true at this point. Multiple sources are now confirming that the Ruby Mar was struck by Houthi missiles a couple days ago, which is a British-owned Belize-flagged vessel. Now, notably, the Houthis said that they allowed the crew to evacuate safely, which is an interesting way of saying that. The other side of that story is that U.S. and allied military forces rushed to the ship's assistance and helped to offload the crew. So I don't know that I would necessarily call that the Houthis allowing the crew to evacuate, but hey, to each their own. Again, there were rumors yesterday that this Ruby Mar had been sunk or was sinking. It looks like right now that the ship is still afloat, but it is taking on water. So its eventual sinking is still in the cards, but does not appear to have taken place quite yet. Then turning back to Gaza, there was an interesting article published in the LA Times by Irfan Galaria. I apologize for the pronunciation there. Titled, "I'm an American doctor who went to Gaza. What I saw wasn't war, it was annihilation." And I thought this was worth bringing up because it's an American traveling there. This person's been in war zones, operated in war zones in the past, so there is a level of comparison that they can pull from. And I think it highlights just the tragic nature of war in general. So she said, quote, "I began working immediately, performing 10 to 12 surgeries a day, working 14 to 16 hours at a time. The operating room would often shake from the incessant bombing, sometimes as frequent as every 30 seconds. We operated in unsterile conditions that would have been unthinkable in the United States. We had limited access to medical equipment. We performed amputations of arms and legs daily." She said many amputations could have been avoided if we'd had access to standard medical equipment. She said, "I stopped keeping track of how many new orphans I had operated on. After surgery, they would be filed somewhere in the hospital. I'm unsure of who will take care of them or how they will survive." I thought that was notable. Again, just kind of bringing home the tragic nature of war. These children going into surgery for these doctors to try to save their life, and they might not yet know that when they wake up from that surgery, their parents aren't going to be there to greet them because their parents didn't make it out of the rubble. Just the number of times that that's happening in this and any war, I think it hopefully just kind of brings to light just how awful this is, what we can do to each other as human beings. And in this case and any other conflict around the world, hopefully we can find a way to rise above this and stop the killing all around. But that's all I've got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out the Substack linked in the description below. We've just started to bring some experts, analysts, researchers on board that are putting together some really well-written pieces, in my opinion, diving into topics that are adjacent to what I'm talking about in this video that hopefully provide a little more context around what we're getting into. It's all free. Again, linked in the description below. Hope you enjoy. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.